here we are with another episode of Data Crunch. We have Robin Purohit here with us from Paradis. I'm really excited to talk to him today. He has some really interesting things to discuss about recommendation engines and about enterprise AI and some successes and pitfalls. He has an interesting background in terms of a lot of experience in the tech sector and now running a startup. So I wanted to turn it over to you first here, Robin, and have us introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having me. So I'm Robin. I'm currently CEO of Paradis and co-founder. This is my third decade, believe it or not, in the IT and tech industry. Born and raised in Canada, been in the Valley, Silicon Valley, since the late 90s. And in my career, I've kind of been an inventor. I've been a product marketeer and growth executive, and I've been a globetrotting software corporate executive running very large multi-billion-dollar software portfolios. But this is actually my fourth startup.
You've been through three so far, and I mean, startups are hard, right? Is it just you like the punishment, or maybe you figured something out that most people haven't?
Yeah, I think I'm always really attracted to times of change, right? So in my professional career, I kind of have an instinct when the market and customer needs are changing really quickly and technology is starting to mature, things get really fun. And in those days, you want to be part of a startup, because there's no rules and you can kind of take advantage of these massive changes in the market. If you're lucky, you can be very successful. It takes a little bit of luck and timing, but I'm always been a creative guy, so that's where I thrive.
You've had a long history in the tech sector. I'm assuming all of your startups have been in the tech sector. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you watch those trends, what you've seen, and like I'm going to jump on this wave here and create something. What have you seen? What's been your experience?
Yeah. So basically, the three kind of phases of my career. The first one, I focused on connecting things at really high speed. And then the second phase of my career, I focused on making all these new distributed systems scale. And then the third phase of my career, I focused on making all that stuff work as people needed to professionalize the world of IT, right?
Got it.
And so in each of those phases, I kind of, there was inflection points that I saw that made it fun to do a startup. So my first one, I kind of left a comfortable career at a big networking company to use fiber optics to connect things together much, much faster than ever before. And that gave birth to the backbone of both internet as well as data center communications at very, very high speed. More recently, I've been kind of fascinated by data, and how do you help businesses take advantage of data to allow humans to do amazing things. And that's what I really think the enterprise AI market's going to be about for the next 10 years.
As someone who kind of is watching these trends and things like that, what kinds of things are you seeing in data specifically? Because I love the startup scene and the data scene, obviously, and it's sort of the nature of the podcast. Like, what are you seeing now that is impelling you to this next startup?
Well, it's kind of interesting parallel to what we saw start 10 years ago with the big data movement, right? So big data movement 10 years ago, there is an amazing amount of fast maturing open source technologies to enable whole new ways of storing and accessing data for new kinds of applications. And it was happening at a time where I think there was a lot of envy in businesses watching this latest generation of consumer tech companies and the amazing stuff they were doing and trying to create their own, data systems that could scale and do similar things. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more. There's a whole kind of wave of adoption that happens when such inflection points happen. A lot of wasted money, and then things really take hold and start to scale very quickly. The era we're in now is that data infrastructure is largely there. It's kind of very comfortable. People put on multiple different kinds of repositories and clouds. And so now the challenge is, how do you connect all that data together and allow a human to do something new and something really innovative? I think what's going to happen is we'll move away from these siloed workflow applications to some new kind of user experience that allows salesperson, an engineer, a customer support person to be like 10x more productive than they are today.
How do you imagine that UI working or tool working? I know people have dabbled in that, right? Like how do we get AI or analytics into the workflows of
Yeah.
specific people doing specific things, right? And so what's your vision of that?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is to think small. You want to think small before you get overly ambitious. All these technologies, there's also a lot of dreams and fantasies of how how magical they can be, and that usually leads to a lot of overinvestment. With enterprise AI, what I've learned this last couple of years is that you need two things. You need to get two things right. One, you need a lot of data, and that data needs to be fairly high quality in order to train models and make predictions. And you shouldn't underestimate the challenge of doing that. The second thing you need to do is have a lot of human interaction because the magical algorithms are still evolving, although the technology is pretty amazing. It's not really where people's expectations are, where you can do an AI project and all of a sudden everything is automated. It needs a lot of human intervention and human guidance to tell the algorithms whether they're right, wrong, whether they're getting warmer or cooler. And only by a lot of that human exercise do things get to the critical point where it becomes useful. So those things you've got to get right. You've got to find a use case where a lot of people want to use something, and you have to spend a lot of time getting the data to be high quality enough to make predictions. And in the middle of that, there's a whole bunch of experimentation, which is where the smart tech companies and engineers are spending their time.
Well, let's talk about that. I know because that's a struggle lots of people go through, particularly the first part you said, the quality data, which
Yeah.
rightfully shouldn't be underestimated. That's kind of the boring part, but it's foundational, right? So I don't know if you have some experiences or stories or maybe just advice or things you've seen, but how do you approach that part and get it right so that everything else works?
Yeah, I think the thing to acknowledge is not like the old days of master data management and BI, where things were highly structured. The data that we need to tap into for AI is kind of everywhere. It's in very structured systems, probably many generations of structured systems, by the way. It's in highly unstructured databases that have exploded the last 10 years. And there's just a lot of content and conversations, right? So what you need to do is to create a data pipeline to take all those things and have some unifying theory that makes sense of it and connects it together. And the enabling technology that we use and a lot of the industry is using is called a knowledge graph technology is popularized by Facebook and Google and internet applications. It's very, very powerful to connect all those different sources of conversation, unstructured content, structured content in a way that now you can create some new value. So you don't have to go back and clean up every data repository for years and years. You just have to have this at scale data processing machine with this new kind of technology that enables you to kind of create insights and recommendations.
And then once you have that, of course, then you're talking about kind of this human in the loop concept or people being highly involved, right, in tuning these things and making sure they're working for these really small niche use cases. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how you'd approach that or how that's done correctly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of buzz about chatbots nowadays, about how to use chatbots to take extremely high volume known conversations and automate them. I think that's kind of interesting, but a fairly tactical use case, mainly because I don't think it addresses the human potential. I don't know how you feel, but I hate talking to chatbots when I go on a customer service site.
Yeah,
It immediately tells me, oh, this company doesn't want to talk to me, right?
sure. Yeah, I mean, the
Secondly,
chatbots rarely get it right. They rarely get it right.
yeah, the most amazing chatbots, help me find something and then connect me to something that somebody I really want to talk to, and after that, I'm off to the races. So I'm more interested in more advanced things. So when people, engineers are trying to solve problems every day to run IT systems or build better software, salespeople are trying to navigate a lot of different pieces of information to navigate the sales process and figure out what the right set of next steps are. Those are high cognitive load tasks that require experts doing things, based on their personal experience. So what I believe the next opportunity is really bring them recommendations or advice, saying, "Hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's what we think could be useful for you while you're doing this particular task that can help you be better." So don't overpromise that, hey, we're trying to automate your job. No, we're trying to help you do better at your job by giving you advice and insights while you're doing your work, wherever you're doing it, right? So you want to embed these insights in whatever tool or interface that human happens to be using at the time.
And are you talking in this case mainly about engineers, like software engineers, those kinds of people, or sort of across the board, anyone trying to get something done, you want to be able to?
Yeah, I think what the market opportunity is for any business user, right? So it could be a salesperson, it could be a financial analyst, it could be a support or service person. We in particular are focused on the tech market. No surprise given my career, that's what I'm passionate about. I've kind of spent my career traveling around the world, getting yelled at by a lot of customers who are unhappy with using my products because people can't understand them or can't take advantage of the latest and greatest release or feature. So I've seen the gap myself in the things we create and how difficult it is for people to use that value quickly. And so we're kind of soaking in that problem. How do we help, developers, cloud operations teams, tech support people to be dramatically more effective by giving the advice while they're trying to build and release and operate advanced technology?
That's an interesting problem space. And I mean, the classic, right? I mean, everybody who is a developer knows, like, they're Googling half of the stuff they're trying to do because, like, there's so much knowledge out there, no one can have it all in their head, right? So is this something, but sometimes you don't even know what to Google for, or like, how do I solve this problem? Like, what is the terms I even use, or what do I look for? Is that the space you're trying to make more effective, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, well, we kind of have a long, but again, where we're starting right now is on helping people get advice on cloud native technologies in particular,
Okay.
Which is kind of the hottest thing on the planet right now. And there's so much need and there's so much change that's happening very fast that is a great place for us to add value. So, well, going back to your description, you're absolutely right. Most technical people, when they have a problem or trying to learn something, they go to Google, and they try to master keyword search, and they get a lot of stuff back, right? And maybe they've kind of cracked the code on exactly the right keywords to get their answer, but most of the time they do not. And so that natural place for them to go to is a place where experts are congregating, or these big community forums. The kind of the big daddy of all of them is Stack Overflow, which is, I think, now the 5th most active website in the world. And so if you're a business person listening to this, you might not know of it, but all your technical people do. There's 125 million monthly active users that come to Stack Overflow looking to get answers to technical questions that range from programming language to using the latest and greatest cloud native technologies like Kubernetes or whatever variant of database, open source database you're using, right? So that's where people are going. And so what we see is a potential to help people answer questions faster on these massive public communities. These places are great gathering places that attract all the best minds. But what we've seen is that there's not a lot of things out there to help people answer those questions faster. And so that's where we think we can initially help in our first offering.
Tell me maybe a little bit about how that works. Like, how are you making those recommendations? How do you even approach that? It's a multifaceted problem. How do you do it? How do you make it work?
again, going back to our initial conversation, the first thing to realize is that the data is everywhere. So let's take a topic like Kubernetes, which is very, very hot right now. What we do is we look for every place that there's active conversation in Kubernetes, whether it's Stack Overflow or the 15 other people that are creating distributions and product variants of Kubernetes. So we kind of take all those conversations, we take all the published content around those products in whatever form it might be a document, a blog post, a knowledge article, etc. And we actually ingest that in and start training our models, looking at all the Q&A history or conversation history on these forums to have some initial value on making recommendations to a question. So that pre-training step is super important because going back to what we talked before, we take all these distributed sources of information and then we apply a knowledge graph technology to interpret those pieces of information to make recommendations on an answer to a new kind of question. And we're not right 100% of the time, but
Sure.
we can certainly be a lot better than a Google search, especially for a more nuanced question where people think in these questions in terms of narrative, not keywords usually. And so we want people to type their question in more natural language, and then we'll give them a recommendation saying, hey, here's a ranked set of things that look like they're most appropriate to the problem you're trying to solve.
So essentially, I mean, what you're talking about is something where someone can, much like Google, they type in a question, but it's so targeted to the development space, and it takes the whole phrase into account when it's searching for, like, okay, here's the answer, here's something you need to check. Is that?
Yeah, we're kind of soaking in kind of the IT domain. So that means we're building up a set of language and techniques that interprets the intent of the question and can extract the best value of all this kind of structured and unstructured content that we've ingested to make a recommendation.
Got it. Okay. That's great. I mean, there's lots of questions there we could dive into. One on the top of my head is, how do you determine the quality of the source, right? So like a lot of times these are really technical things, lots of technical code. How do you determine, like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about and this guy doesn't? Like that's a hard problem.
It's a great point, and the contrast for search versus what we're trying to do with AI. Search is a big horizontal platform, Google search, right? It doesn't score what is trusted or untrusted content. It's trying to develop things at scale or deliver answers at scale. We look at all of the ratings of the people and that are posting answers. We look at what answers have been voted or upvoted or have resolved a question, and we use various techniques to bubble those answers up when we find a similar match. There's lots of signals in this data that indicates whether a person or a piece of content is highly valued by the user community. And that's really invaluable when you kind of combine that with that kind of domain focus of the IT industry.
So if I'm searching on the tool to find something, a developer, I can kind of trust, like, yeah, we're picking up signals to say, yeah, this is a good answer, and filter out the rest. And
correct. In fact, one of the cool features that we've added in, and I think is an indication of where we need to go with our offering, is you can actually, when you're typing in a question or even looking at a question on Stack Overflow, we'll identify who the best experts are on that particular topic. So you can filter results by individual experts if you happen to know them or really trust what they have to say. And creating that kind of personal connection to thought leaders or technical influencers is extraordinarily valuable, especially if you don't know that person personally.
Right, and then how do you guys, so we've talked about quality, and I'm curious about how you went about kind of training this algorithm, right? I mean, there's, like you said, a lot of times when you're training something like this, there's lots of human involvement trying to figure out, like, yeah, like that was a good one, that was a bad one, not necessarily even in terms of quality, but just in terms of relevance. Did you
Yeah.
find that, I mean, you have a lot of technical people sort of vetting your results and giving feedback to tune this thing, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, we do. We have basically our own algorithmic process that does evaluations
Hmm.
using all the typical machine learning techniques to vet whether our initial recommendations are good enough to put in a human's hands or to show to a human. And then we drive programs to kind of surface these recommendations in a very easy way. So as you're looking at a question, recommendations pop up, and as people answer or click on something that's relevant, each time they do that, it's a signal back to us that we're warmer or cooler, and that gets incorporated into our prediction algorithm. So
That's great.
this is kind of we talked about Stack Overflow here, but it's kind of what we think can be generalized. So imagine you're working in your own IT support organization and you're doing a bunch of cloud native deployments and you're struggling with Kubernetes like every one of my teams has because Kubernetes is not easy to master and there's lots of variants of it that run differently on different environments.
Uh-huh.
So as you're discussing those questions, what we want to do next is then pop up and saying, hey, based on what the discussion your team is having, here's some advice that can help you, move forward or solve that problem. So think of it as kind of your just ongoing assistant that's getting smarter and smarter based on all these conversations happening, on public forums that helps your team embrace these new technologies and be more successful.
Got it. So is it the kind of thing that, like, much like, I don't know, like on Netflix, when it knows what I like to watch and it serves that up, or whatever, will this then, obviously it tunes your algorithm as a whole, but is it also targeted to the specific user to say, hey, you usually search for this kind of stuff. Here's some new
Yeah.
content or whatever.
Yeah. There's kind of a hot term called a recommendation engine machine learning nowadays. It's something that we're using to describe our technology. NVIDIA uses a lot, for example, to describe the next generation of applications. Typically, recommendation engines have been deployed in B2C markets, like Netflix, like the Amazon shopping assistant or Honey, that it's watching you while you work or watching you what you watch and deciding what ad to serve, what movie or music you should listen to next, or a better place to buy what they think you're looking for, right?
Hmm.
And the benefit that B2C AI has is that there's enormous number of user signals that they can tap into. Some of which makes people like me a little uncomfortable, but it's actually fairly straightforward to get a lot of user signals now with the digitization that's happened in the B2C world, right? So it's kind of an embarrassment of riches. What's different about the enterprise market and these kind of other problems we're talking about is that, first of all, the decisions that you're making on recommendations are far more critical, right? You're not just buying your next widget or your next album, which is a great thing personally, but your professional reputation might be impacted by the decision that you make or your success in your job.
Sure.
So the stakes are higher, first of all.
Yeah.
And secondly is that you just don't have the same scale of user interaction. So what's really different as recommendations cross over to the enterprise, finding some way to extract the initial value out of the data is some organizing principle, and finding some specific way that people will use those recommendations enough scale to get that virtuous circle of the human loop moving is super, super
Yeah.
important.
Got it. That's great. I want to give you maybe the last word if there's stuff we've missed that you think is important that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, two things to close. One is, I think the era we're going to now of enterprise AI has a lot of parallels to what happened with the ERP CRM market, right? So I think back when all the kind of form and workflow software was first starting to emerge with the promise of automating the back office, there was tremendous enthusiasm about it. A lot of money got spent and a lot of money got wasted, quite frankly, during that kind of peak hype cycle.
Hmm.
And then what happened as we kind of went through the trough of disillusionment, a company like Salesforce popped up and said, hey, we have a very easy way to consume a very specific part of that equation over the cloud that makes people more effective in selling stuff.
Right.
And they just focused like a laser in the early days on establishing that model. And I think we're kind of in a similar stage with enterprise AI. There's a lot of enthusiasm and therefore a lot of money being invested. In some cases, maybe a lot of wasted money being invested.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, I think, is the year where we're calibrating back to where are those things which are easy to consume, have some near-term ROI and benefit to real humans, so that we can build on that in a more incremental stair-step way, and then things will accelerate exponentially from there. So I think that's really what this year is going to be about. For us, what we talked about today is helping people drive their reputation and community support on places like Stack Overflow. You can actually download our free version of the product, Paratus.ai website today. And that's kind of like the first hit single of what we hope will be a very successful platinum album someday. There's many things that we'll be announcing over the next year along that same theme.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like you guys are moving fast. Is there just again in closing here, and I'm curious, is there anything that you could share in terms of where you're taking the company and what the plans are?
Yeah, well, the long-term vision is to create coaching network for all these tech people. So you think of people on the community, people building products, the legions of DevOps engineers and people running cloud. We want to connect all those people together using our AI capabilities so everybody can move faster and be more successful.
Got it. Yeah. That's all. I mean, making the dev sector more efficient is, I mean, all boats rise in that case, right? I mean, it touches so many things in our society. So that's
I fundamentally believe that the best career track for people that are looking for employment, especially as we as we look to kind of up level and recover in our global economy. Hopefully, our part of that industries will allow more people to participate in the tech sector by kind of closing the skills gap that they need. That would be our human aspiration for the company.
Yeah, agreed. We need more good people in the space. There's no doubt about that. So it's Paratus AI. You guys check out the website, download the free tool, and it'll make you more effective. And that would be great. And so, Robin, thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and we've been happy to have you on the show. And wish you the best of luck with your company.
Thanks again for having me.